I'd always wanted to do the show about art and rock and roll. I really my desire to kind of pay back that introduction to contemporary art, to a different way of thinking about the world visually, sonically, etc. That really kind of inspired the show, but also the recognition that so many artists have drawn from rock and roll and have really kind of been informed by it. But there's someone like Peter Saville who designed the album covers for Factory Records, and perhaps best known for album covers for Joy Division on the left and New Order on the right. And his approach to making graphic design for a commercial product was very much very similar to that of contemporary artists, conceptual artists, thinking about how you kind of change, how you kind of combine Henri Fontaine-Latour painting from the 19th century with this kind of color-coded graphic that had a very kind of like techno, spoke the sort of language of what was then, kind of computer technology, and sort of forcing those things together to kind of create this interesting tension. And so Peter was represented in the show, and Peter has influenced so many of contemporary artists, from Wolfgang Tillmans to Robert Longo, to Liam Gillick, who I eventually will be showing you and worked with. And so, again, to kind of recognize this overlap between these artists. And just even, the music itself, and how, how rock and roll really, people get very, defensive about it, possessive about it. That was one of the problems with this show, I think, that I knew was going to happen, is, people get very territorial about rock music. And it was funny, because, people like Peter Saville or Colin Newman, who is the lead singer of Wire, or even Genesis P-Orridge from Throbbing Gristle, all of them were really happy to be in the show, really excited about the concept, excited to participate. The artists, like Mike Kelly and Cameron Jamie, people I adore and hugely respect, were really Mike was like, well, I suppose you could do a rock art show, if you want to, but I'm sure it'll suck. So, yeah, great, thanks. I actually kind of wished I had listened to that, very early on. I probably would have changed my mind, but I was intrepid and decided to go on. But I think it's because they felt like when art gets a hold of rock music, even they themselves, it kind of changes it. It sort of forces it to do things that you don't want rock to do. Cameron Jamie was talking about how rock and roll isn't about art and its use. It's really about Little Richard and tearing up the stage and leaving, having a concert and being put having been so some images from the show. I invited Rita Ackerman to make a big piece for the lobby. I wanted to have something that really announced the show in our front lobby space right away. And so Rita initially wanted to do this big, huge painting on stretcher bars, but it just would have everything costs a fortune. So, fortunately, compromise, going back to the drawing board is always hugely important in our profession. And so she found this kind of PVC rubbery material that she felt even more, rock and roll in the spirit of the show. And so she did this huge piece that kind of figured her distinctive use of these kind of almost anime sort of female figures. But it was really fun to see her working on this piece in the lobby. She was cranking MIA and just flinging paint around. We actually had to ask her to cool it down because people were getting paint on them. But really transforming the space into a studio, really kind of, again, reinforcing the notion of how rock and pop music really become part of the art experience. Rita herself has been in bands, and her work's been used on album covers. And so I really wanted to have artists who had rock and roll in their DNA, who you could really not see the artist outside of some kind of real rock influence in their work. Tony Orsler, a piece called Sound Digressions in 7 Colors, featuring various musicians who are really part of an experimental approach to rock music, whether it's Tony Conrad or members from Sonic Youth, and sort of showing them experimenting and improvising on various screens, and with the sound of their experimentation kind of coming together. Sometimes it would sort of coalesce into something that actually, sounded like something, but most of the time it was just a cacophonous racket. And so, but really kind of exploring the notion of like how you can maybe synthesize or bring together an experimental kind of rock concert visually through objects and through a video sort of presentation. Tony also, made a couple of videos for Sonic Youth back in the day. It was in a band called The Poetics with Mike Kelly. And so Tony, again, lifelong rock guy. Dave Muller and Pedro Bell. Pedro, the works on the right, these amazing album cover designs for Parliament Funkadelic albums, sort of showing where funk and rock kind of get together, and showing how his really distinctive style could really kind of inform the album covers and really create this distinctive identity for this band. I tried to really shy away from album covers as much as possible. I made certain kinds of judicious exceptions. The way that the P-Funk album covers, for example, kind of like resonated with Raymond Pettibone's drawings for the Black Flag album covers for his brother's band, I thought was like an interesting and kind of played well together. Or the Carl Worsom painting of Screamin' Jay Hawkins, had a very similar sort of sensibility. And Pedro has been hugely influential on people like Mike Kelly, and others, and so it was really a way to kind of like, I made that sort of exception to my own rule. And then Dave Muller, started creating these wall paintings where he would sort of tell the sort of story of rock and roll in reverse by kind of looking at it as a cross-section of a landscape. So kind of, the organic process by which rock and roll is sort of developed. And so you see this kind of like timeline that he creates, how one thing leads into another, but you'll notice that he had the big sort of disco ball and this big black void at the center, which is sort of where disco happens, where either rock music becomes maybe commercial, Pink Floyd gets like, loses the plot, and but also where punk happens, and so this big black negative void kind of takes over at the center of the piece. He's been doing these other works, which are the spines, painting the spines of record albums, and people will commission him to do their portrait through their top 10 albums, and so which are about human-sized, and so Dave is another. I wanted, in a lot of the group shows that I do, I want a certain kind of performative or interactive participatory thing to be part of it, to have that happen. And Rikrit Tiravanet's sound studio, Rikrit, part of the band, decided to create mimic the studio that he would use in New York, and create this recording studio that people could come in, make appointments, and actually cut a demo. When it first appeared in 1997, it was a demo tape. I think we changed it to a CD burner to keep in pace with the times. But it was really to kind of, I wanted to have a live element of people coming in and playing rock music as part of the show. And then one of my all-time faves, Jim Lambie, he was in a band called the Boy Hairdressers, which became Teenage Fan Club, artist from Scotland who I think really is like the key linchpin of the show. He really translates rock music's energy and intensity into sculptural form. So this piece at the center called The Birds, which it's this kind of big bird, kind of cast sculpture that he's poured paint on and created this sort of psychedelic look, and then it rests on cans of spray paint. Unfortunately, we found that like the spray paint that we get over here tends to pool and kind of congeal, and we couldn't ship spray paint from Scotland because it's illegal. So it had a slightly adverse effect on the outcome of the piece, which you can kind of see in these little kind of marks and scuff marks, etc. But then he's also known for these cut vinyl floors that really kind of transform the floor into this really active sculptural presence. And I think just Jim's like really kind of changed the way that the kind of language of sculpture and how you can think and work sculpturally.